Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, March 9th, day 520 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Tomorrow marks day 50 of the ceasefire hostage release deal. So where is the IDF still operating in the Gaza Strip, and what is happening on the ground there? All eyes around the world are on the current Syrian government's massacre of its Alawite population, and Israel has publicized some of its operations over the past week. And the IDF is also operating in Lebanon, including escorting Haredi Jewish worshippers on a mass pilgrimage just over Israel's northern border. And in light of yesterday's International Women's Day, we're going to spend the last bit of the program focusing on the IDF's women warriors. All this and much, much more when we're back. Tomorrow marks day 50 of the ceasefire agreement. And from what I understand, Manny, the IDF was meant to or is meant to pull out from the much contested Philadelphia corridor by tomorrow. So what do we know right now about that and where the IDF is in general operating in the Gaza Strip?
So by my count, at least 50 days is tomorrow, 50 days from the beginning of the ceasefire agreement. But right now we're in a bit of a limbo with the ceasefire. There's been a lot of changes on the way. They sped up some of the releases, and now we're in a position where kind of finished with phase one, but they've extended it by a little bit, but we haven't really entered phase two yet. As far as I remember from the agreement is that on day 42, meaning the end of the first phase, Israel needs to start withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor, and by day 50 needs to complete it while the talks are ongoing or while the second phase is beginning. So we're in a bit of a weird situation now. I'm not sure there'll be a withdrawal tomorrow. I mean, we've already seen Israel sort of stop the aid entering Gaza, and there's all sorts of other threats on the table right now. But I don't think we'll see the withdrawal because of all these changes to the agreement on the fly. But what we could see is if suddenly there's an agreement on the second phase, then I think we'll see Israel start to withdraw, maybe even do the withdrawal very quickly if there's an agreed upon second phase. But the talks are ongoing now, and we don't really know that much what's going on. There's all sorts of leaks and reports coming out, but nothing fully confirmed yet.
Okay, so what do we know about where the IDF still is? They're still in the Philadelphia corridor. What does that mean?
So aside from that corridor, the Egypt-Gaza border area, basically along the entire Gaza-Israel border, both the western section, the eastern section and the northern section, IDF troops are deployed inside Gaza, not by much. It's up to around 1 kilometer. In most areas, it's a little bit less than that. And the army is enforcing to make sure that suspects don't approach those areas, and sort of any threat that's identified there, the IDF carries out strikes. We saw this morning 2 Palestinians were killed in the Shaja'iyya area, which is sort of east of Gaza City. According to the IDF, they were planting a bomb in the area. Not even the first time I've seen that in the last few weeks. There's been several cases where the army has accused terror operatives of planting bombs near this buffer zone near Israeli forces, and the IDF has carried out strikes in response. I think the Palestinians, at least the Hamas Health Ministry in Gaza, have reported more than 100 dead, I think, in Israeli strikes since the beginning of the ceasefire nearly 50 days ago. Those numbers should be taken with a grain of salt, of course, but it does still show that Israel is still acting, carrying out strikes, opening fire on suspects in this buffer zone area and also on the Egypt-Gaza border area.
So if full-on combative war were to begin again, how quickly do you imagine that the IDF could retake or enter all the parts of Gaza that it has actually evacuated from?
So it really depends on what the IDF wants to do. If it wants to do sort of the staged ground invasion that it did in the beginning of the war, I think the preparation time will be less long. It took 3 weeks, I think, for the army to sort of get itself together, and that's when it had no plans. Over the past few weeks, the IDF, of course, has been planning for the potential of returning to Gaza. The new IDF chief of staff as well, Eyal Zamir, has been involved in approving these plans and getting them ready and going to the south and speaking to new commanders, especially the new chief of the Southern Command who's due to enter the role in the coming weeks, probably. So it really does depend, because if the IDF wants to go for a sort of large-scale assault, attacking multiple areas at the same time, going in both from the north and from the south and the center all at once, it's going to need to call up reservists, lots of reservists, and that will take time. Not all of them will show up. We've seen over the course of the war the response rate of reservists dropping. At the beginning of the war, it was over 100%. It reached, later on in the war, to like 50, 60% in some units. So that's going to be a challenge for the army if it wants to carry out something large. But whatever it really comes down to the government, whatever they approve, whatever the political level, the defense minister, the prime minister approve the army to do, then it will have to carry that out. I think within a short while it can launch such an operation, but some areas Hamas has prepared itself very well for the Israeli return. It could pose a significant challenge for the army.
Let's turn to the north. And a Syria War Monitor reported yesterday that over 745 civilians from the Alawite minority have been killed in recent days by security forces and their allies as authorities clash with militants loyal to the former government of Bashar al-Assad. So restoring security has been one of the most complex tasks for Syria's new authorities, which were installed, of course, after the Islamist-led forces ousted Assad. Assad is, of course, an Alawite. And the Israeli military, relatedly or unrelatedly, said on Saturday that it had carried out several, quote, targeted raids in southern Syria over the past week and even issued footage from its operations. So the troops apparently captured and destroyed numerous weapons during the missions, including rifles, ammunition, rockets, and other military gear. So Manny, we talked about this briefly on Tuesday of last week, but we've heard statements from Israel regarding the Druze community, that Israel would come in defense of the Druze community, even in the outskirts of Damascus. And so far, we're not really hearing the same kind of statements regarding the Alawites. But do you think possibly that the publication of this footage from Israeli airstrikes in Syria was possibly some kind of message?
So regarding the Alawite community, it's geographically not something that's particularly close to Israel. It's what's happening right now in Syria is mostly in the northwest. And I'll add that there are very few Alawites in Israel. The only Alawite community, I think, is Rajah, the border village between Israel and Lebanon. So it's less of a prominent thing in Israeli society, whereas the Druze is, of course, a major part of Israeli society. They serve in the army. There's several senior Druze officers in the IDF. They're commonly referred to as, the brothers of, or the cousins of the Jewish community in Israel. So there's a very deep connection there. And there's also a deep connection between the Druze in Israel and the Druze in Syria. And they are mostly located in the south, very close to Israel's border, and in the Damascus area. So issuing this footage is definitely, sort of a message to the Syrian authorities that Israel means what it says when it wants to protect the Druze that are close to Israel's border. How far Israel will go, will it, push all the way to Damascus to protect them? I'm not so sure that's something that Israel will do. That's something that's, it's not that close to Israel's border. But these operations that we've seen are mostly in the buffer zone that Israel captured a couple months ago. There was a report that I saw this week that troops were operating around 13 kilometers from the border. So that's outside the buffer zone. But that's, I think, as far as the IDF is operating right now. It's not going all the way to Damascus. And the sort of statements we've seen from Israel, from Netanyahu, from Katz, they've all said that the southern Syria area needs to be completely demilitarized, that there's no presence of the new Syrian government in that area, and that the Druze population should be protected. But right now, it seems like the Syrian authorities are busy elsewhere, so this allows the army to carry out its operations in southern Syria.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. Now, let's continue to Syria's neighbor, Lebanon, and hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jews were escorted by the military on Friday to the apparent burial place of a Babylonian scholar on the Lebanon border after, well, weeks of illegal attempts to reach the site on the part of the Haredim. Now, Rav Ashi is believed to be buried in the hills near Manara, which is in the Galilee Panhandle, and the shrine marking his spot actually straddles the Blue Line border position, and it's situated right now within a military compound that is hemmed in between an IDF post and a UNIFIL post. But interestingly, later on Friday, the IDF also carried out airstrikes in southern Lebanon, saying it is targeting Hezbollah military sites. So let's first talk about the strikes in southern Lebanon. What can you tell us?
There were several strikes over the weekend. We saw on Friday there were strikes on Hezbollah military sites. So the army said it targeted weapons and rocket launchers that were being stored at Hezbollah sites, saying that they were targeted because it was they posed a threat to Israel. And then on Saturday morning we saw a drone strike on a car in southern Lebanon, and this strike targeted a Hezbollah operative. He wasn't named, but the army said that he was involved in, quote, rehabilitation of terror infrastructure and directing Hezbollah terror operations. We've seen several of these strikes. There was a few days ago a strike targeting a relatively senior Hezbollah naval commander in Lebanon. So during the ceasefire, Israel is continuing to operate against Hezbollah. Any activity that the army detects, whether it be in southern Lebanon, even in the Bekaa Valley, which is outside of sort of the zone where Hezbollah is supposed to withdraw from, and all the weapon shipments that are coming into, some of them are still coming into Lebanon via Syria, Israel is targeting those still, despite the ceasefire, arguing that these sort of incidents are posing a threat to Israel, and that it gives Israel the right to act in those cases.
So a lot of the information that we're getting about these strikes and, of course, the operation escorting the Haredim to the shrine comes through the IDF spokesperson office. And we heard that the chief spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, is to end his role in the coming weeks and retire from the military. That was announced on Friday. The move was, quote unquote, agreed upon with the new IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, though many see it as a de facto dismissal, as Hagari was not given a promotion for his work as IDF spokesman during the war. As we know, Hagari really was above and beyond, in many cases, snapping down into the tunnel where 6 Israeli hostages were murdered, and then racing off to tell the family later on about how this happened. He took so much upon himself. So how do you, Manny, explain this de facto dismissal?
So the sort of surprising part about the story is not that he was supposed to end his role as spokesperson. 2 things. One is most of the spokespeople serve for 2 years, and he began the position in March 2023, so he would have ended his role around this time anyway. If Halevi was still in the position, they may have asked him to continue his role for longer or ended and appoint a new spokesperson. That's the less surprising part. And also the other less surprising part is usually when a chief of staff enters the role, they usually try to appoint a new spokesperson. They want somebody that they already know, someone that can it's a job which, you need to be close with the military chief to carry out correctly. But that wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part is that Hagari was not promoted. Of the last 5 IDF spokespersons, I think 3 were promoted after their role as spokesperson, to the rank of Major General in Hagari's case, because he comes from the Navy, to Vice Admiral. Hagari, from what I understand, had hoped to become the next defense attaché to the United States. The current one is also a former IDF spokesperson. He dies Zilberman. And this would have, put him on track to take up another senior role in the future in the general staff, maybe the head of the Navy where he previously served. But from what I understand is, Hagari wanted this role. He had sought to be promoted. Halevi, the former chief of staff, could not promote him. He was limited by Defense Minister Israel Katz making appointments. And when Zamir replaced Halevi, from what I understand is that he also thought that Katz would not sign off on approving basically appointments at that level, general, the rank of general and above. requires the approval of the defense minister. And as we know throughout the war, mostly toward the end of the war, or in the last few months, Hagari clashed with the Israeli political leadership, especially the defense minister Katz. And it's very difficult or very hard to see Katz signing off on promoting Hagari, especially due to the public spats that they would have. So that's, I think, as far as I understand, what happened is that Zamir, during this meeting or one of these meetings, told Hagari that he couldn't be promoted. I think he may have been offered another role at his rank, but Hagari, as far as I understand, decided not to accept that and instead end his service entirely, instead of waiting around in another role for 2-3 years and then maybe being promoted in the future. I think that would have been, from his perspective, would have been seen as him being sort of pushed to the side and not being rewarded for his role as spokesperson. And like you mentioned, he did, personally, I think he did an excellent, job as a spokesperson. I think many in the Israeli public would agree. He was there for all the bad news. When there was good news, you saw the prime minister and the defense minister making statements, but he was only there for whenever there was bad news, he was there to announce it. And he took upon himself quite a lot. Things that normally a spokesperson wouldn't do, updating the families of civilians who were killed in Gaza. You'd think that's not really the military's responsibility to do, but he did those kind of things as well. The IDF investigations, the tactical investigations that troops, on October 7th, he was there to present those to the families as well. It's not something that the army really needs to be presenting to the families, but he took it upon himself anyway, because he realized that the army does need to sort of rebuild trust with these communities in the south, and that's why he took upon himself. So really, all the bad news he handled.
So you said the next rank is Major General. Is that correct? What you said? His next rank up would have been Major General?
Well, for Hagari, it would have been Vice Admiral, because he's from the Navy. He's currently Rear Admiral. But it's the equivalent of a Major General, yes.
So how many women have actually reached that rank, if any?
As far as I know, 2, and it's the 2 that are currently in their roles right now. It's Orly Markman, who's the president of the Court of Appeals, the military courts, basically, and Yifat Tome Yerushalmi, who's the military advocate general. She's basically the IDF's top lawyer. I think they are the only, apart from previously, I think there was only one before her, before those 2, which was Orna Balbivai, who was currently a Knesset member. She was the head of the IDF personnel directorate. So she was, I think, the first. And now we have 2 more who are currently in the positions. They've both been in the roles for the past 3 or 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not a new appointment or anything like that. But in total, I think only 3 women have reached Major General in the IDF.
So in terms of getting promoted in the army, it seems like, yes, there's of course the personnel and the support wings. And as I understand it, every fighter needs something like 9 personnel to support the fighter, him or her, right? But in terms of being promoted through a combat role, what is the highest rank or the highest position that a woman has so far attained?
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, and someone can correct me afterwards, but as far as I remember, the top combat roles held by women are brigade commanders. So I think there's a few. Right now, I know of 2. So there's and the 2 that I'm aware of are in the artillery corps. So a couple years ago, a female officer, I think we spoke about it on the podcast as well a few years ago as well. She was appointed to head the 99th Division's artillery regiment. And then just the other day, Eyal Zamir made a whole list of new appointments, around like 40 or so appointments. And one of the appointments is also a female officer being appointed to head a different artillery regiment, which is basically the equivalent of a brigade commander, the rank of colonel. So I think that is the highest rank. We have not yet seen a female officer command a division yet. That could happen in the future. There are divisions that are I wouldn't say considered less, but divisions that are, more entry level, where some officers go to first before commanding, a commando division or a full infantry division. There's regional divisions that I definitely think that a female officer could easily be appointed to, with the right experience, through other units, previously in their service. That could be something we could see in the future, but right now, that's the top combat roles that we've seen women be appointed to.
So there's no future chief of staff in the running right now. Obviously, no future female chief of staff. But what's interesting, and now I'm speaking as a mother of a female fighter, is that there's a lot of pressure, I'm being told, on her right now to continue and to become, she's already a commander, and to become an officer. But then I was also told that there's really a glass ceiling, that after a certain point, there just aren't any interesting jobs for these female officers, and they're relegated to desk jobs quite early. Do you think that this is, number one, accurate, but number two, do you think that this is something that happens mostly to female officers?
It might be a problem in the army in general. I mean, as you go up the ranks, there's less jobs, and they kind of pick a certain type of person to go forward with it. And I mean, just speaking generally, in the last few years, up until now, recently, pretty much all the top officers came from the paratroopers brigade and their adjacent units, and other commando units. If you look at the general staff now, like, up until Eyal Zamir and his new deputy entered the role, essentially everyone came from either the paratroopers, Sayeret Matkal, or Shayetet 13, the naval commando unit. So if you're not in any of those, top tier units, it's very difficult to get very fast in the military. But I think that could be a change that we'll see with the new chief of staff. He comes from the Armored Corps, from the 7th Armored Brigade. The first time a tank officer has become chief of staff. His deputy is from Golani. There's been not that many top officers from Golani. I mean, there was Gadi Eisenkot, who was chief of staff several years ago. He was from Golani, but still, it's a little bit more rare. We are seeing new appointments that he's making. The new Southern Command Chief also is Golani, and the new Operations Directorate Chief comes from, I'm pretty sure, Givati. So there are some changes happening as to where officers are coming from which units. So I think female officers who are now entering the army, especially if the IDF opens up other units, if they open up infantry units, if they open up the special forces more for female soldiers, there's definitely a chance that in another 20, 30 years, we'll see a female general in charge of a command, or in charge of another top role in the general staff. Chief of staff, I don't know. That's could be very far off, but it's still possible. There's no reason why it shouldn't be possible.
Well, as you mentioned, of course, most of them come from these elite units, from the paratroopers, from Sayeret Matkal and Shayetet 13. But so far, women are not really allowed in there, aside for as paramedics, if I'm not mistaken. And in fact, the only female soldier who died in Gaza was a paramedic in the Givati unit, which you also mentioned is one of the more opening up to other officers type unit. So right now we're being told that there is one woman who has qualified to begin the training of Sayeret Matkal, but as far as we know, she has not yet enlisted. So we have a ways to go to see whether she is the candidate to be the female chief of staff, correct?
Yeah, so she passed the screening tests pre-enlistment, or sort of at the very beginning, and eventually she will draft. And then of course there's the training period, which I'm pretty sure in the elite units is at least a year long, or even slightly longer. So she'll have to get through all of that as well. But if she passed the screening, I think there's a good chance that she'll be able to get through it. But there's a first for everything. I'll just add on top of this, I heard recently that in the Navy, there's going to be, for the first time, a female commander of one of the corvettes of the SAR 6 class missile boats. So that's also a first. I don't think she's been entered the role yet, but I think she was appointed a while ago, and she was going through some other training in the meantime. But there's a first for everything, and could be this woman who enters Sayeret Matkal and succeeds. Will hopefully inspire others to try and push for these elite units, and then later on in their service get to more senior roles.
Our very own GIA Jane. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.